Shalom, family. This video is meant to provide some deeper insight into Israelite genetics. It's a subject that, content creators have touched on before. You have Gentile content creators that, not just content creators, just people in social media in general, who like to claim that, the descendants of the slave trade and certain West Africans could not possibly be Israelites, and they make their claim and put forth whatever they can come up with. Of course, many Israelite content creators have touched on this subject as well, but what I've tried to do here is give some deeper insight into the subject. So I'm going to touch on 4 key points. What does it mean to be an Israelite, genetically speaking? Israelite, Yashar'el in the Hebrew, the Proto-Sinaitic Hebrew. So that's the first point. Second one is, what does the DNA profile of an Israelite, a Yashar'el, versus a Gentile look like? The third one, I'll do something a little different. I'm going to show some receipts using my own genealogy report to prove that the descendants of the Transatlantic slave trade and many of the West African tribes are Israelites. And then lastly, I'll touch on giving some insight into which DNA test to consider taking if your goal is to determine whether or not you have Israelite ancestry. So those are the 4 areas that I'd like to touch on to just help the community out. So the first thing I'd like to do is talk about the 3 different types of DNA tests. There are Y-DNA tests, autosomal DNA tests, and mtDNA tests. Y-DNA tests your Y-DNA, which is a test of your paternal heritage. Only males have Y-DNA, and the great thing about these tests is that they go back thousands of years. They can identify DNA markers in your paternal line going back thousands of years. Y-DNA changes very, very slowly over time, and for that reason, they're a very good way of testing your lineage going back extremely long periods. The second type of DNA and DNA test is the autosomal DNA test, which is what most people are familiar with. And I'll give an example in a little bit. But these tests provide insight into your family relations and modern day ethnic classifications going back 5 or 6 generations. So they're good for finding, let's say, a second or third cousin, identifying which modern day populations you're more likely to be derived from, that sort of thing. Again, 5 or 6 generations back. And then you have mtDNA, which, similar to Y-DNA, it goes back thousands of years, but it tests your maternal line. Let me first explain what autosomal DNA tests are, because these are the types of DNA tests most people are familiar with. We've seen a lot of these from the 23andMe, Ancestry, etc. And people usually misread what these tests are actually saying. So I just want to put it out there and touch on this test so that, if you're looking at one of these types of tests with the results, this is not going to give you any indication as to whether or not you have Israelite ancestry. What these tests do is they tell you the probability of you being a descendant of someone within each of these communities. So the 23andMe, for example, or whoever, they go out, they do a bunch of autosomal tests on, let's say, Italians, on Irish people, modern day Irish people, Eastern Europeans, West African, Nigerians, Ghanans. And then they'll take your autosomal test and compare it to those various populations and then tell you, okay, Based on your results, there's a 38% chance that you're Irish, Scottish, or Welsh, and there's a 25% chance that you're Eastern European, and 15% probability that you're Iberian, 12% probability Scandinavian, so on and so forth. Most people read this as saying as if it said, they're 38% Irish and 25% you're not. These are not percentages that combine to give you a whole. They're probabilities. And again, this type of DNA test doesn't tell you whether or not you have Israelite ancestry. So if you've done one of these before, they're very popular, they're very cheap to do. But if you're looking for the type of DNA test to try to determine if you have Israelite ancestry, this isn't it. And this is not going to tell you much. Again, these tests go back 5 to 6 generations. They're very informative for, matching you with modern day ethnicities. They're very accurate with that, but again, these are probabilities. So they're good for that, telling you your ethnicity. So, for example, if one of these percentages were, let's say, 89%, and then you just had 11% of other, then you could be fairly certain you were whatever that 89% is. So they're good for that kind of thing, but again, for Israelite ancestry, you have to go back much, much further. In terms of which type of test, which of the three categories, maternal, paternal, and autosomal, which type you need to do if what you're seeking is Israelite ancestry. The thing to keep in mind is that Yahweh categorizes us all by the paternal line. In Numbers 1:18, we read, "And they assembled all the assembly together on the first day of the second month, and they declared their pedigrees after their families by the house of their fathers, according to the numbers of the names from 20 years old and upward." So all the nations on earth are categorized according to their paternal lines. The maternal line does not determine your pedigree. That's a very important distinction between the practices of the Israelites versus the 1948ers. We go by the Torah, and this is how Yahweh sees people and categorize them. So for this reason, you need to take a Y DNA test if what you're seeking is Israelite ancestry. The other thing to point out here is that he's actually given an example in Scripture that shows us that it is only the paternal line that matters. In Leviticus 24:10, and I'm reading from the Sefer, we read, "And the son of a Yashar'elite," Yashar'elite means Israelite, "the son of a Yashar'elite woman whose father was a Mitzrahi," Mitzrahi is Egyptian, "went out among the children of Yashar'el. And this son of the Yashar'elite woman and the man of Yashar'el strove together in the camp." Now, the thing to pay attention to here is that here, twice in both these sort of sentences, the son of the Israelite woman is described as just that, the son of an Israelite woman. However, the Israelite man is called a man of Yashar'el. So a distinction is being made between what is considered a man of Yashar'el and the son of an Israelite woman, or the son of a Yashar'elite woman. So in other words, the fact that his mother was an Israelite did not make him an Israelite. Otherwise, he would have been referred to as a man of Yashar'el. And this sentence could have been much simpler by just stating two men of Yashar'el instead of going to the extent here to make the distinction that this man who was the son of an Israelite woman was not considered an Israelite. Y-DNA is categorized and grouped into what's called haplogroups. In the chart I'm showing here, in the letters represented on the going top left to bottom right, A all the way through R, represents what's called haplogroups. Each haplogroup is basically a point within the global Y-DNA tree where there was some sort of mutation in the Y-DNA. So someone, a male, was born into an environment, circumstances, either diet, environmental factors. Something caused a very slight mutation in their Y-DNA that wasn't present in that person's father's Y-DNA. And that person went on to have many, many, many sons and grandsons and great grandsons and so on and so forth. Compared to the rest of the population, their male descendants were very plentiful. So that little mutation that there was in their Y-DNA then carried forward sufficiently in such great numbers that it created its own sort of either, in this case, a Y-DNA haplogroup, or as we'll see a little later on, or it could be what's called a subclass. So for example, haplogroup A has branches coming out of it, and with each branch representing its own mutation. So haplogroup A represents mutation, and then each sub-branch of A represents another mutation, and same for the other haplogroups, especially E, which is what we're going to focus on as we talk about Israelite ancestry. Let's talk about haplogroup E. Haplogroup E, just like every other major letter haplogroup, branches off into multiple subgroups. And the two major subgroups for haplogroup E are E1B1A and E1B1B. When I say major, I mean most of the population that are of haplogroup E are of one of these two major subgroups. E1B1A is also referred to as EM2. You can see the M2 symbol, that line going across that then branches out into multiple different groups. The term EM2 and E1B1A are used interchangeably. And then you have E1B1B, which is on the EM215 line, or EM35, then branches out further and further. So the point here is that each of the major subgroups, E1B1A or E1B1B, branches out further and further and further. So below the EM2 or E1B1A level, there, like I said, over a dozen different branches going further out. But whenever you look up Y haplogroups of major populations, you tend to find reference to E1B1A or E1B1B when it comes to haplogroup E, because back when most of the DNA studies of paternal lines within various population groups were done, the DNA tests weren't really specific enough, detailed enough to go and show what's called your terminal haplogroup. So you can be E1B1A, which is showing the EM2 level, but within that subgroup, your specific terminal haplogroup would be something else, and that sort of terminal haplogroup is something that DNA tests 20 years ago, when a lot of these population DNA surveys were done, wasn't identified back then because the tests weren't detailed enough. So there've been a lot of advancements within the DNA community, the DNA sort of testing and analysis over the past 20 years, and we've gotten a lot more detailed. Now, some of you may have heard before that the E1B1A Y-DNA haplogroup is the haplogroup of Israelites. And I want to start showing some receipts for why that is, and for which populations align with that assessment or that claim. What I did was I took a look at all of the African tribes where there's some oral history of Israelite ancestry. And when I say some, in most cases, you wouldn't find, at least not today, if you go back far enough, you'd find this, but today you wouldn't find necessarily most or all of the population of either of these tribes that can, make reference to this oral history, because over the years, over the centuries and decades, that oral history has sort of declined. So when I make reference here to oral history, what I mean is that at least some groups within the tribe have retained that oral history of having ancestry from the 12 tribes. And the oral history will generally talk about how they migrated to wherever they're located. And I'm showing here that every single African tribe of which there is at least some portion of that tribe that's retained oral history of Israelite ancestry are haplogroup, Y haplogroup group E1B1A. Igbo, Yoruba, Zulu, Nyambo, Ewe, Ga, Lemba, Bamaleke, Yakuba, Mende, all of these tribes are tribes where there is very clear oral history from at least some subsection of the tribe of Israelite ancestry, and I've put here where the tribes are located, and they've all tested as having the most predominant Y haplogroup is E1B1A. This here is very, very clear that clearly showing that the paternal profile, Y-DNA profile of the groups of people who have retained that oral history are all the same, which is significant because, remember, for you to be an Israelite, you have to be a descendant of Jacob, or who we call Jacob. And so everyone who's a descendant of Jacob has to have the same Y-DNA haplogroup. Very important to remember this as we get into some of the various other haplogroups of people of European ancestry who claim to be from the tribe of Yehuda. You have to have, there's no room for any other sort of result here. You have to have ancestry from the same single man, Jacob, or Jacob, and therefore all of the various, members who were claiming to be Jews, you all have to have the same Y-DNA haplogroup. There's no room for any variation of that. Just scientifically speaking, it has to align. And what I'm showing here is that there's perfect alignment with all of these groups, their oral history, and the Y-DNA haplogroup that is common within the paternal line. By the way, also, E1B1A is the Y-DNA haplogroup that matches the male sort of descendants of the transatlantic slave trade, or at least the majority of them. So whether the slaves went to Brazil, the U.S., anywhere else in the Caribbean, the represented Y-DNA haplogroup within that population is E1B1A, tying back to the Deuteronomy prophecies that very clearly stated that we would be enslaved again, this time by ships. So very important to note that the while some claim that this theory of, black people from the transatlantic slave trade or these African tribes are sort of making up the story, note that there's no way, or the chance of you, all these different subgroups making up this story, but all sharing the same paternal history, the chance of that being, both those two things being accurate is just almost impossible. I want to take a look to see what percentage of Black Americans are Israelites. And knowing what we know about what the DNA profile of an Israelite looked like, I went to ChatGPT to take a look and do some research. And what I found was, as you can see on the screen here, the percentage of Black Americans with Y-DNA haplogroup of E1B1A is 60 to 65%. And you may ask, well, why is it so low? And there are only two possibilities. The first one is, as you might imagine, during the slave trade, or I should say during slavery, there would have been some R words happening to female slaves from the slave owners. So that explains some of it. And then the rest of it is explained by more of this. Remember that scripture makes it clear that the children of a union between a Yashar'el woman and a Gentile man is not a Yashar'el or an Israelite, while the children between an Israelite or Yashar'el man and a non-Yashar'el woman is an Israelite. And there are plenty of examples of those unions in scripture. So, one may argue whether or not it's fair, but don't take it up with me. You can take it up with Yahweh on the day of judgment. I didn't make these rules. It just is what it is. So, the reason we have only 60% of, Black people in the country retaining that heritage is because of this. Do with that information what you may. One of the deceptions you'll see out there is that whenever there are any published reports about DNA tests performed on any genetic material or bodies found in ancient sites, and they know that these bodies are Jews, they'll categorize them as West African. They'll do tests, and when they find that they're E1B1A, instead of calling them Jews, even though they know who the people were, they'll just say that they had West African ancestry and sort of separate those two things, i.e. West African ancestry as being disconnected from the people who they refer to as the Jews. This example here is from Archaeology magazine, and they're making reference to ancient DNA found that they date back to the 7th century in England. And what the article points out is that they did some DNA testing and found that the autosomal DNA showed 20 to 40% affinity to modern Yoruba, Mendi, Mandenka, Isan. All of these groups, by the way, these are all tribes where the Y-DNA haplogroup is E1B1A. And they say that, these people came to Europe sometime in the mid-500s and 600 CE. These were Jews who migrated to Europe. We'll talk at some point about the migration pattern, not this video because I don't want to make it too long, but most of you may know that when after leaving Jerusalem and there was a scattering, while some went south into the African continent, some went north into Europe. Some went to Iberia, and then from Iberia went further into what is today England, Scotland, etc. Some just went directly there. But these are remains of people who were Jews, and I have no doubt that the scientists who discovered these remains and did the tests know that, but when they publish the report, they'll just make it, seem as though they're just West African. So it's a deception to be aware of, and you'll find even, in modern day Israel, they don't release DNA results for all of the bodies, and there are a plethora of them that are buried in the cemeteries there. Is that information is kept under very, very tight guard. Now I'll get into showing some receipts using my own DNA profile. First, let me tell you what you're looking at on the screen here. I did Y-DNA genealogy test from Family Tree DNA. I'll get into that later, but they're one of the pioneers of Y-DNA testing. Of all the various testing companies, I think they've done the deepest research in Y-DNA, and I did their what's called their Big Y DNA test, which basically covers your full Y chromosome, as opposed to some other tests that are just give you basic coverage. And I was put into the major haplogroup E1B1A. More specifically, though, I have a terminal haplogroup because my test was very, very specific, which I wouldn't get into here. For the purpose of the point I'm trying to make here, just know that I'm E1B1A, which is EM2. So after getting the results, I uploaded it to a platform called YFull. YFull does analytics on your DNA data, and I found them to be better in terms of finding matches. Their analysis tends to be at least they only do Y-DNA analysis as far as I'm aware. Their analysis tends to yield more informative results. So again, this is Big Y from the Family Tree DNA, then uploaded to YFull. And in YFull, you can see your DNA matches that, again, as I mentioned earlier, Y-DNA tests go back thousands of years. So on YFull, you can see your DNA matches from antiquity to, 1,000 years. It doesn't tell you exactly how many years ago, but that data I'll explain. There's information here that gives you an idea, and I'll explain that. The key point, though, is look at the matches. Now, the first thing you'll notice is that, and I'm Negro. My most the ancestor whose names I'm familiar with, as far as back as I can remember, they were born in Barbados. So I am Negro / Black, whatever you want to call it, but Yashar'el Israelite. And now, what you're seeing here is that the first peculiar thing is that the matches, well, none of them, and these are matches where the matches live in present day, or where the most distant ancestor of that match lived. So some people put where they are currently, some people put the country where their most distant ancestor in their family tree, the most distant known family member in their family tree lives. Some people do it that way. Either way, what you have is, that's notable is 2 matches from Oman, 1 match in Kuwait, you have a match in the U.S., and the match that found his or dated his ancestor that went as far back as he found to Scotland. Look at the name Yahya in the Oman matches. Some of you may have seen this presented by other content creators related to Israelites in Iberia, in Spain and Portugal, more specifically, where the name Yahya comes up as it relates to Yahya, the Negro. And I'll get into that a little bit. But so Yahya and the Kuwaiti matches, these are both matches in the quote-unquote Middle East who are, well, not both, there are three matches. They're all tied to descendants of the Babylonian exile. And the Yahya line moved from the outskirts of Babylon to Iberia. I'll get into that a little bit more. And the name for the Kuwaiti match, it's in Arabic, so you can't see it, but I researched it. And I'll get into that a little bit about, the Kuwait, where Kuwait is. We know where Oman is. These are all areas that are close to ancient Babylon when the Yahudim or the tribe of Yehuda was exiled in Babylon. They first of all didn't live in Babylon itself, but they lived in the outskirts because they wanted to live in the pasture land. And then after Ezra took most of them back to Jerusalem, once the Persians conquered Babylon, some of them stayed. So what you're seeing here in the matches from the Middle East are descendants from Babylonian exilarchs that remained in the area, chose to remain in the area after the exile was completed, when most of the exilarchs went back to Jerusalem. You also see the first match, I've actually had multiple communications with that particular match. He was born in the Northern Caribbean, but through a whole lot of DNA testing, much more than I've done, traced an ancestor back to Scotland, back in the, I believe, the 11th century, Scotland. We already touched on the fact that the tribe of Yehuda, the Jews, were in Western Europe, migrated, and it was a slow migration. It wasn't all one migration to Western Europe. England, Scotland is another area. Iberia. So some of them went to Iberia, then Western Europe. And again, these migrations happened over a meaningful period of time. So one of the things that I see quite often when, people who are not Negro want to object to the idea that we're Israelites is that they say, well, you have no ties to the Middle East. Well, I'm showing you hard evidence here that not only does my paternal line show clear evidence of ties to the Babylonian exiles, but none of my matches are actually in Africa, which is ironic, and there's a reason for that. As the exiles, and each person's paternal line and lineage is going to be unique to them. So, as I mentioned before, E1B1A splits off into, multiple different subgroups, and it continues to split and split and split. My particular terminal haplogroup is about 12 layers below the E1B1A level. So it splits and splits and splits and splits. And my terminal haplogroup is very rare. Now, these are all descendants of Dawood, of King Dawood, who they call King David. And I'm going to show you in a minute how that ties into the Yahya last name. Because it's a rare paternal line, it means that, and because there are no matches shown in Africa, we'd expect. I mean, most people with E1B1A today live on the African continent, by far. I'd say at least 80%, probably 85% of people today with E1B1A haplogroup still live on the African continent, mostly West Africa. So the fact that none of the matches are in Africa is unique, but that's just a unique feature of my particular paternal line in terms of where they went, who they were, and I'm going to show you in a minute, tie this back to the Davidic line. What I'm showing on the page here is this is from Wikipedia, a summary of the profile and ancestry of Yahya ben Rabbi, who later became known as Yahya the Negro, the Portuguese nobleman. Now, this summary doesn't go into the history of the family before Yahya ben Rabbi, but I've also researched that, and basically they migrated to Iberia from the area around Babylon at some point, well after the return of the Jews to Jerusalem, or the Yahudim to Jerusalem after the Persians conquered Babylon. So they stayed, and the reason a lot of the, or not a lot of the, but some of the descendants of Dawood, of King Dawood, stayed is because they were treated actually fairly well. The Yahudim generally were treated pretty decently, given the fact that they were captives in Babylon, in that they were allowed to maintain their own territory and had a fair amount of autonomy. And in particular, the line of David, they were actually treated very well. And so when Ezra were taking or making way for the Yahudim to return to Jerusalem after the captivity, when Cyrus, the Persian king, allowed him to go back, some of them were like, well, we're doing pretty okay here. We don't know what we're going back to in Jerusalem. We'll just stay here. And then later on, the progenitors or those, I think it might have been his either his father or grandfather, moved to Iberia after that dynamic of being fairly protected or free from persecution changed. They moved and migrated into Iberia, and I wouldn't read all of this, but basically he was the family traced their lineage back to King David. He was very highly respected by the king of Portugal, and you can read some of that history here. Some others have covered this, so I'm not going to belabor the point. But after the Jews were expelled in 1492, some of these, the descendants, you can see some of them actually went and migrated into Africa, and then were taken later on as slaves. Now, I don't know for certainty whether my particular paternal line migrated into Africa or somewhere into Europe and then Africa. That part is unclear. But regardless, if you're an Israelite, you're African. The fact that I don't have any matches in Africa doesn't mean, remember, Israel sits on Africa's tectonic plate. So the 12 tribes were all native, or the 12 patriarchs of the tribes are all native to what's known today as Africa. Israel, modern day Israel, sits in Africa. So at some point, you go far back enough, we all came. Well, we didn't came from, but we are our ancestors, starting with the 12 tribes, were native to Northeast Africa. But I just wanted to point this out to make that tie between Yahya and the line of David here in the Iberian Peninsula, specifically Portugal. Let's look at the Kuwaiti side of things. Origin, this is ChatGPT. Dudes in Kuwait. Most Jews in Kuwait were not indigenous but came from Iraq, especially Basra, Baghdad. So now let's check. It's still going here. Right, so were Jews from Basra, since it says that the Jews the Kuwaiti Jews were originally from Basra, Iraq. Let's check to see if these were of exiles from Babylonian captivity. So yeah, so we see here that Jews from the Babylonian captivity, or well, some of them, did in fact migrate to Kuwait. And I also checked the name of that, the most recent ancestor for the Kuwaiti match, and the first name was Isa. Isa is the Arabic word for Yahusha, our Messiah. And so even there, you have that connection in terms of name to the Davidic line of the tribe of Yehuda. I would like to touch on the Ashkenazi Jewish population just a little bit, just to draw a distinction between their DNA profile as compared with the DNA profile of Yashar'el people, or the Israelites, as I've discussed. And what you see here on the screen is a breakdown of the haplogroups present within the Ashkenazi population. And what you'll notice here is that, unlike the case with the true Yashar'el or Israelites, who all share the same Y DNA haplogroup of E1B1A, which is necessary in order to justify an ancestry linking to one common paternal ancestor, the Ashkenazi people are actually representative of a whole mix of people. This is something that most people don't realize. Most of us think that they're just Khazars, where the truth is it's much more complicated than that. The Khazar portion of that population is represented by the R. I think both R1 and R1A and R1B. But you'll see here that there are multiple paternal lines represented within this community. They're not a homogeneous group of people, which in of itself proves that as a group, they can't be Israelites because, as discussed earlier, you have to share common paternal ancestry. So you all have to be linked, share a common paternal ancestor. And if you have multiple haplogroups present, it means that you don't share a common paternal ancestor. The E that you see here isn't E1B1A, at least most of it isn't. Most of it is E1B1B, which is a different DNA profile than that of Israelites. You see a lot of J1 and J2. J1 and J2s, those are Persians and Babylonians. A lot of the Talmud was created by Persians and Babylonians who adopted the modern day religion of Judaism, and they created the Talmud. They sort of infiltrated the priestly class as well, and I'll touch on that a little bit. Just remember J1 and J2. You may have heard reference to the Cohen model haplotype, where the European Jewish people say that that is representative of the line of Aaron. Well, that's a lie. Those people are not Levites at all. You'll see that the people who they say are of the Kohen or the Levites, a priestly class, having what they call the Kohen model haplotype, are all haplogroup J. And again, haplogroup J are Persians and Babylonians. And I'll show you where actually these same group of people infiltrated the group of Israelites that became known as the Lemba people, or the Bubba clan of the Lemba people, where you will see, I previously shown that the Lemba people are predominantly represented within the by E1B1A Y-DNA haplogroup. However, there is a portion of them, particularly the Bubba clan, where you may have seen published reports that link them to the Cohen model haplotype. Well, that portion of the Lemba people are actually people who mixed with the Babylonians and Persians during the Babylonian exile and decided not to go back to Jerusalem because they didn't want to let go of the foreign wives and husbands that they acquired while living in Babylon. And I'll show you that in the Lemba oral history. So just remember, when you see talking points about haplogroup J being Jews, I'll show you haplogroup J where it originated, and you know, that reference to the Cohen model haplogroup are actually not Israelites, but Babylonians and Persians. But the key takeaway here is that there's a myriad of DNA paternal profiles represented within the Ashkenazi community, and that in of itself shows that they're not a homogeneous group. They don't share common paternal ancestry, and therefore cannot be said as a group to be descendants of Yaakov or Jacob. This chart is from Family Tree DNA, and all rights and credit goes to them as the owners of this image. I'm just using it here for commentary, but it's a fairly recently updated migration map of the haplogroup J. Let me explain a little bit what's shown here. So this line you see it starts as a purple line. It shows the migration of, out of Africa, and as the colors of that line changes, the colors of the line changes. Each different color represents a change in haplogroup or a mutation that created a modification in haplogroup. So if I were to show, for example, a haplogroup E or haplogroup B, haplogroup M, whatever, they'll all have that purple, they'll all start out from that purple line, because that purple line represents sort of all of humanity before any haplogroup changes. So one side point to this is that what it's showing is that, contrary to what was historically the narrative about where life begins, what the updated DNA data is showing is that that starting point is in the Congo River Basin, not Ethiopia, but that's a different point. What's important here is that haplogroup J is represented by the light blue line at the top right, and the point that's circled, you can think of that as the most likely location of where the male who had the first sort of deviation that represents haplogroup J was located before they started splitting. The group started splitting in going in different directions. The point there, though, is that location is Iran, Turkey, and then you'll see that the people who descended from that male who first had haplogroup J only then went into Israel and then Egypt from the north. So, very important point. They went down into Israel, Syria, Lebanon, Israel, then Egypt, Saudi Arabia from the north. And if you know anything about Bible history, about the 12 tribes, you know that they did not originate in Iran, in the area of Iran and Turkey. They did not enter Israel from the north. They did not enter Egypt from the north. It's the other way around. So don't want to belabor this point, but just noting that when you look at what the most recent, and this is an update from 2024, profile of migration for haplogroup J shows, it shows them entering that area from the north. And I can get into using scripture which group of people or peoples that represents, given what that migration pattern looks like, but that's beyond the scope of this post. So just wanted to make that point. I'd like to take the time here to talk a little bit about the oral history of the Lemba people, tie that back into the Cohen model haplotype and haplogroup J, to just give some background here that will be relevant to some deception that's out there. So let's do a search, Lemba oral history, Ezra, return to now. Remember that the Lemba are primarily E1B1A. However, there is a significant portion of haplogroup J in there, and I'll show you where that came from. So, according to Lemba's oral history, their forebears were among the Jewish exiles who returned to Jerusalem following the Babylonian captivity. However, when Ezra and Nehemiah insisted that those who had intermarried with foreign peoples separate from their non-Israelite, and this says wives, but it was also husbands, other, depending if you use Google or ChatGPT, wives or husbands, but in the case of the Lemba, it was both. Their oral history referenced both. So both the males married foreign females and females married foreign males. But many of the Lemba ancestors chose to leave Jerusalem rather than comply. They migrated southward, eventually settling in what is now southern Africa. Now, the key point here is that they mixed, or some portion of them mixed, and decided that they didn't want to give up their foreign spouse. Ezra, and for those of you familiar, when Ezra sort of helped to facilitate this relocation of the Jews back to Jerusalem after the Babylonian exile, there was a mandate that you needed to get rid of your foreign spouse. Everyone had to get rid of him. And with this oral history here of the Lemba people is saying that many in that group decided that they'd rather leave Jerusalem than get rid of their foreign spouse. Now, that's significant because let's take a look here. Y-DNA profile of Lemba people. And remember, Y-DNA is the paternal line. So here you see that within the Lemba, the Cohen model haplotype isn't really a haplogroup. It's more of a Y-DNA signature, a collection of, you can think of it as a collection of genes that are within haplogroup J. So within the Lemba people, you have haplogroup EM2, which is E1B1A, and this is showing 30%. It's actually much higher than 30%. That's E1B1A. Then you have some haplogroup T, and you have haplogroup J. The CMH is part of haplogroup J. So these haplogroups T and J lines up with the oral history of the Lemba, which is that they mixed with foreign spouses in Babylon and decided that they didn't want to let it go. So they just continued making kids generation after generation. And that's where you have the haplogroup J and haplogroup T within the Lemba people, or the Bubble clan of the Lemba people. So when you see or hear this reference to the Cohen modal haplotype being representative of the line of Aaron, or the Levites, that's false. This DNA signature is actually the DNA signature of people who the Lemba mixed with in Babylon. Remember, I mentioned haplogroup J, Babylonians and Persians, whom they kept within these people infiltrated the Jews that the Lemba people, or that segment of the Jewish exile that later became the Lemba people, infiltrated the Levites among them, and then what happened is over time, the priestly group within that portion of the Lemba became haplogroup J, because the men who married the women who were Israelites. They were haplogroup J. They merged, infiltrated the portion of those people who were of the Leviticus priesthood and changed the DNA profile of that portion of people. So the haplogroup J's are not the original Israelites. They're only those people or the descendants of those people who were in Babylon who mixed with the ancestors of the Lemba who are actual Israelites. So just keep in mind that when you see reference to the Cohen model haplotype, they represent a perversion or mixture that happened in Babylon with the sort of ancestors of the Lemba that resulted in this lineage being sort of corrupted. Have you seen this fake 12 tribes chart? It's been in circulation for quite some time. I think a fair amount of people realize that the information here is not accurate, but I just wanted to touch on it anyway because it's rooted in both vanity and, quite frankly, stupidity. When you look at these associations they make here, the first thing you realize is that a lot of the groups that they're associating with the various tribes aren't even homogeneous groups of people. They're nationalities rather than a homogeneous group of people. For example, Colombians are not a homogeneous group of people, so they could not possibly be attributed to a single tribe. And in fact, I'll show in a minute that most of these various groups are predominantly comprised of Europeans, Argentina, Chile, Puerto Ricans, Cubans, Dominicans. None of these are homogeneous groups of people. Most of them are just nationalities. And even the mention here of Black Americans being Judah doesn't work that way. So the descendants of the slave trade are the combination of Yehuda, Benjamin, and Levi. So those three tribes. And, Black Americans are no different from Black Caribbean people or wherever. If you're a descendant of the slave trade, those three tribes, which were mixed into the Yahudim, the Southern Kingdom, are sort of mixed in, and the only way to know if you're a particular tribe is to do a very specific DNA test, and even then, there's a strong likelihood that you wouldn't find in your match information that's specific enough to align you with a specific tribe. And in my case, I got lucky, but in many cases, you wouldn't be able to get that specific. So, and then, of course, as we discussed before, it's about 65% that are even Israelites in the first place. So this chart is deceptive, and I'll get into it in a minute and show you that most of these groups are actually of European ancestry, not Israelite ancestry. And in fact, a lot of them are not even mostly native ancestry. This chart was it's basically a summary that was compiled using ChatGPT, which is just very convenient when you're looking at sourcing data points, because I like it over Google because ChatGPT will generally pull all available sources, whereas if you just do a Google search, you'll find individual sort of pieces of research, and you have to click on it, and maybe you'll choose the one that comes up first or second or something like that. Whereas ChatGPT is going to pull everything, and you can put it in a nice table. So What I did here is I researched the Y-DNA haplogroups present in some of the countries referenced in that 12 tribes chart. And what you see here is that the vast majority of these population groups are represented by European Y-DNA haplogroups. In Colombia, it's 80 to 90%. In Uruguay, 93 to 99%. Puerto Rico, 85%. Cuba, 80%. Dominican Republic, it's unclear. The percentage there for European is going to be not as high, but even there you see that you do have a fair amount of R haplotype. You do have E, you'd expect E1B1A, despite, Dominicans like claiming they're not black, but a meaningful portion of them are E1B1A, but you have a fair amount of European ancestry mixed in there as well. Guatemala, a mix, and you see that in Guatemala, the mix of Y-DNA haplogroup that's when they say African, you can think African E1B1A. For the most part, that's what they're calling African in this chart here. In Guatemala, it's low. Argentina, small. In this case, it's like 10% or so. So, as I touched on before, most of these population groups, all of these population groups, the vast majority of the Y-DNA haplogroups represented are not E1B1A. In most cases, they're European haplogroups. And that's because, and there are various accounts of this, when the Europeans came to the Americas, before they started importing slaves from black slaves, first from Spain and then Africa, they pretty much nearly wiped out the Native American population. They slaughtered most of them, and they didn't handle enslavement very well. So eventually, those populations were almost completely replaced with European Y-DNA, and which is why you see such a high representation within those populations versus, the Black American population, say, for example. And what I'll also get into is in a little bit, there's also some deception about a lot of the Native American tribes being Israelites. So let's touch on that here and take a look at what that looks like. Here's some more debunking. I've also seen representations made that Native Americans are Israelites. Well, this is unequivocal proof that they're not. Here in this table, which was put together from asking ChatGPT to show me the Y-DNA haplogroups of the various Native American tribes, you can see the tribe listed in one column, then you see the major haplogroups represented within those tribes. So the most common haplogroup is haplogroup Q, and specifically the branch M3. Haplogroup Q originated in Siberia. These are Siberian peoples. And haplogroup C originated in East Asia. And then you have European haplogroups. And in the last column, you have African E1B1A. And what you see is that for all of these tribes, you have Siberian, East Asian origins. Whereas for some of them, you even have cases where the European haplogroups dominate. And that's because some of you may already know this, but when before the transatlantic slave trade, the Europeans almost wiped out the population of the quote-unquote Native Americans. The population, the numbers were in dire straits in terms of how low they got. And the reason why you see so many European haplogroups is because they basically displaced, particularly the males, with their own DNA, at least in some of those tribes. And you have this present in all of them, but in some cases, they pretty much wiped them out. The E1B1A that you see here at all, when you see there's any presence at all, are basically cases where freed slaves or runaway slaves went and lived adjacent to or in some of these groups. Some of these various native tribes actually owned some slaves, and then, at some later point, they became free. And there's some articles out there with situations where some of these former slaves were promised, citizenship within the tribe, and then they tried to renege on that promise. But in either case, the E1B1A representation is derived from people who came over during this transatlantic slave trade. They're Israelites. There were a very, very small amount of Israelites who came here as free people. But, they're people who, like, for example, if you may have heard of Mansa Musa of Mali, though there's no record that his journey, which was made before Columbus came, his journey to this part of the world was successful, i.e., there's no record of him actually landing here. When you look at those African heads they found in Mexico, they're clearly representations of Africans. So there's a very, very, very high likelihood that whether it's that particular group or others that arrived here, it's unclear at what time frame it was, but for the most part, these what we know as Native Americans are Siberian, Asian people that traveled and arrived in this part of the world. And you can see from their haplogroups, even the haplogroups before European sort of conquest, that they're not, they could not be Israelites. To wrap this up, I wanted to give some insight into the various DNA testing companies, and help provide some sort of information to help you choose which one to use if your goal is establishing Israelite ancestry, which again comes down to your paternal profile. This chart that you see on the screen here is a summary provided by ChatGPT comparing these three testing companies, 23andMe, Ancestry, and Family Tree DNA, and it used various metrics to compare them. But what you'll see is in the top row that when it comes to like deep lineage research, and specifically Y-DNA research, Family Tree DNA is the best option. 23andMe and Ancestry tend to be better for autosomal tests. Those are the tests that will give you ethnicity estimates, and it's compared to modern populations. They just have larger databases for that purpose. But when it comes to deep Y-DNA going back, thousands of years, which is what you need for Israelite ancestry, family tree DNA, they are more of the pioneers when it comes to Y-DNA testing, and they offer a few different tests. The most comprehensive one is the big Y700, which is one I did. That's what I would recommend. It's like I think it was $4.99 or $4.69, something like that. So it's a little pricey, but I've tried the cheaper options and they just weren't informative. They didn't give any matches and so on and so forth. So from my perspective, it's better to just, spend the extra money to do the full big Y 700, which is the most comprehensive option. There are private labs that you can use to do these tests as well. You can use a private lab to do a full Y, and they'll test your entire Y chromosome. Same thing for your mtDNA, but they're even more expensive than family tree DNA. Either way, what I found is that complementing this with the analytical tool YFull, and the website is yfull.com, will get you the best results, because I found that on YFull, I got better details in terms of matches than I did on family tree DNA. Now, YFull does not do testing themselves, so you have to upload your data from whatever testing service you used for the Y-DNA analysis to YFull, and then they do further analysis on it and show you matches. The good thing about YFull is that because they're getting DNA data from multiple platforms, you might find a match or have matches that used a different testing company than family tree DNA, and so it's a way to have a broader sort of reference base. So that's my recommendation. You can test, either use a private lab, use family tree DNA, do the big Y700, then upload your data to YFull for further analysis on matches and see what you find. Again, each of us, there are thousands of different branches that lead up to Yaakov or Jacob. Same thing to King Dawood, etc. So our match profile are not necessarily going to be the same. In fact, unless it's a sibling of yours, your profile or your lineage back up the Y-DNA tree is going to be unique to you. So don't be disheartened if you do this test, you do matches, and maybe it's not as informative as the example I showed from my test. As long as you're E1B1A, it'll that itself demonstrates Israelite ancestry, and what the specifics look like beyond that, you might be able to glean further details. You may need further research to get those details, but either way, I think if you do the full analysis to get your terminal haplogroup, you'll find some information that should be meaningful to you in terms of your genealogy research.